So the second thing is, a small business person, I'm thinking like a person who has a small business, they have like 20 or less employees. So the second thing is they don't have to pay anything for health care for their employees. It goes to zero. And then the third thing I'm going to do, because of what Newsom did to small businesses last year, all taxes and fees for small businesses. Now, I'm not including sales tax, just to clarify that. But all taxes and fees on the small business at the state, the county, and the local level, I'm taking it down to zero for 5 years. Because what we have to do is restart small businesses and get people employed, so people can be on the ground floor of a startup small business and, feel engaged.
Right. I'm just thinking, like, just out loud as you're talking. So if I'm trying to start a pizza place, then I'm wondering, like, is there, like, permits? Like, you don't want to, like, bombard a bunch of stuff on people when they just start. And then seeding programs, you need some money to start a business. And then are you going to help people start their own business?
Well, I hadn't thought about that. Maybe that could be a fourth component. But I think helping people pay the minimum wage, reducing taxes and fees up to 5 years, and then taking the person who owns the small business, they don't have to pay anything for health care for their employees. That will free up more capital for the person who wanted to start the small business with him and his associates or friends, and then they have more capital to get a good start, to get the business up and running.
Right.
That's exactly what I want, because I want to promote opportunity and entrepreneur spirit. I want more small businesses because it creates a bunch of small jobs.
Gotcha. The homeless, poverty, mass incarceration, war on drugs are your four main issues. I've asked all my questions, so I don't know if you want to mass incarceration, if you want to dive into any of them and say, is there any other initiatives that you want the people to know about that you're working on?
Well, what I'm going to do is when I hang up, I'm going to send you my main campaign flyer. And and of course it's got all this background information, so I have the skill set to do what we're talking about.
Right.
So you can study that. That's on the front page. On the back page is my 25-part platform, which we've hit a number of the things, but you can look at the whole list of 25 things. And then at the bottom of the flyer, I explain how Newsom's corrupt and incompetent. So it's a three for one. My skill set, my platform, which is probably...
I think you're correct that you have a very good chance of actually taking the whole thing. There's 46 candidates and only a plurality, like 10, 15, maybe 20% would win. And when I look at the candidates that I would consider, I like David Moore a lot. He's a Trotskyist, and I guess I just trust that, because if you're not going to enrich yourself, that kind of makes me think you're going to care about the people. And there's another guy, Michael Loebs. He's a secessionist, and that kind of just raises all kind of alarm bells, like right-winger. But when I looked into his platform, he's got a ton of progressive planks to his platform, so he's actually... I wish he would part his hair and, kind of dress himself up a little bit better. He's got that long hair and its ponytail. And
by the way, I was asked whether California should succeed from the Union, and as you may or may not know, Abraham Lincoln, at the beginning of the Civil War, he determined that the Constitution said you could join the Union as a state, but there's nothing in the U.S. Constitution that still treats it as there's no provision to leave the Union. And of course, Lincoln foresaw that by 1945, in terms of an economic powerhouse, the sole superpower of the world by 1945 was the U.S. And that's what Lincoln was aiming for. He saw that America was going to become powerful and influential and be the leader of the world. And of course, we've done a lot of bad things, and we got to make amends for that. But America is very powerful. People look to us for leadership, and of course, we need to promote freedom and.
Being from a guy from Colorado, I'm like, you don't want to leave us, do you? But then I I get it. I would see why California would want to leave the rest of us. You guys, what's the I heard I don't know what the word is, but there's so much taxes that you send in and then you get back, but apparently it's like 75%. So like, every dollar California sends in, they get 75 cents, but every dollar Kentucky sends in, they get $1.50. And
Right.
so that means California loses a ton of money. Being an economic powerhouse, you got only 2 senators. You have just as much say-so as, the rest of the states and the U.S. government, when really you're kind of the lion's share. You're kind of you're not all of America. I would say New York, Texas, California. That's a good chunk. That's a quarter of America right there.
Well, when we send more money to Washington and we get less money back, you know how that happened, right?
No.
40 years of Reaganism.
Mm.
So when the Republicans were in power, they rigged the tax laws to make sure that California and places like California were sending more money to the federal government than they were getting back. And of course, I'm all for equity. So whatever the states are.
Well, I mean, equity's fine and all, but coming from a right-wing, I'm from Kentucky, so coming from that state, I can understand how, you might get to a point where you're kind of sick of the people that keep voting for, the ones that are against social spending, but they're the ones taking all the damn social spending. So how many times can you bite the hand that feeds you before eventually they're going to cut you off? Like, I wouldn't be against,
Well, the key thing with the federal government is, and FDR and JFK knew this, the role of the federal government is to expand the middle class nationwide. Okay?
Right.
Because as long as the middle class is expanding, then there's a lot of benefits flowing through the economy.
Right.
And so, we need national leadership that's going to work aggressively to expand the middle class. And since Reagan, 40 years ago, the middle class has been shrinking. So, as I said before, metaphorically, low, moderate, middle income families, households, individuals, they're being pushed down the economic ladder.
Oh, that's scary. I had a democratization class, and there's this little quote that you can't have democracy without the bourgeoisie. So the middle class, if the middle class is shrinking, because I mean, what the whole idea is, if you're middle class, you kind of get used to a certain kind of lifestyle, and you won't go. So, so the middle class are the ones that are going to fight for the rights. They're the ones that have enough leisure and freedom to sort of fight for the rights. But if we're all, having a scrounge.
Well, let me give you an example. When the too big to fail banks issued all those fraudulent mortgages in 2008 and the economy collapsed, the too big to fail banks took 4 million homes by foreclosure. Many of those people were middle class. They never got back. They don't own their home today. 13 years have gone by. They don't own their home. They've fallen out of the middle class. Often it led to divorce, suicide.
God, that just feels like an economic tenet. Germany believes in home ownership to help the economy, because when you have a home ownership, you have a safe place to put all your stuff, and then you can build wealth through generations. So the fact, that housing crisis, we probably destroyed how many generations, how many poor people.
Exactly. You got it. Well, the key thing in my platform, which you'll see in a moment when I email you, is two of the things that go in partnership, hand in hand, on how to change America towards the better on the big issues that we're talking about, is we have to disempower the top 1% economic elite. We take power back away from them, by making sure they're paying more taxes. And then we need to empower nonviolent mass movements, because that will push progressive ideas into law, regulation, and policies being changed, so we can expand the middle class. People that are struggling in households that are low, moderate, middle income, we want to create a path for them so they can get ahead. There's opportunity. Things are going to get better. And this idea that they're going to continue to lose ground, we have to reverse that. If you look at polling in California now, 2/3 of the polling public in California, they believe that the gap between the rich and poor is expanding. Thank you, Mr. Newsom, because he won't increase taxes on the rich, where I will. And then when you ask people about the American dream or the California dream, this idea that you can have, a car, you can get married, you can have kids, you can own your home, you can get a good professional job and be paid $45 an hour or something. So the dream of people getting ahead, and we ask people in polling in the state of California, and and the parents say, well, at some time in my life it was good for me, but I'm worried about my kids' future because there's no path for them to get ahead going forward, often because they're drowning in student debt, and no one's helping them with that, which I would, by the way. So and then a lot of the parents co-sign the loans, and of course, their Social Security checks are being garnished in effect to pay, the student loans for the kids. So I'm gonna do what I can to remove that debt, to open up where people work, they get paid, they spend money in the economy, it expands the economy, creates more employment. But this idea that you freeze people in all this debt so they can't do anything and they can't see how they could get ahead, it really does lead to a lot of societal issues, like opioid.
I think you might be able to put it all on capitalism, because if we're all fighting amongst each other, when do we have time to sit down and say we're in this together? And capitalism kind of says we got to fight and scrounge and claw, and we just find our own niche. We find our own little, money gravy train or whatever. We got to figure it out ourselves, and so.
Right. Well, capitalism is one set of ideas, but government, democratic government, is supposed to, if you read the preamble to the Constitution, it's about the general welfare. It's about the
right.
union. It's
right.
about creating justice. It's about creating a fair society. So we have a pretty good Constitution. It's just that the government has been captured by the 1% economic elite because they're paying for all the campaign expenditures. So they're only going to promote candidates and politicians like Newsom that'll give the rich people what they want, but the rest of us, we're going to...
That's kind of been America, though, hasn't it? I mean, look at JFK, RFK, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, Fred Hampton. Really, if anybody comes around and says, hey, can't we do better, they get shot.
Well, just keep in mind that FDR tried to do what he could to create a middle class. He died in 1945, but he put all these laws, regulation, and policies in place. But by the 1950s, when my parents, were starting their family, and they got a home, they had 11 kids. I'm from a family of 11.
1950s, I think that's idyllic America. I feel like, God, that was yeah. Go. I'm sorry.
But my father came from a working class background. He got the GI Bill. He got educated. He got a master's degree. He taught high school science. He joined a union. He got increased pay. My mom was a homemaker. So in the 1950s, when they were developing their family, they bought a home. They got one car at a time. That's all they could afford. Most of their kids went to college, and my father went off to teach high school science, and things were okay, and the emphasis in the family was, education. So
we could point out Dwight D. Eisenhower too. He believed in a massive infrastructure package. I feel like all the bridges and a lot of local bridges, it all came from the 1950s.
So if you look at the size of the middle class in the 1950s and the size of the middle class in the 60s, it was in exponential growth. But by the time we got to Reagan in 1980, he completely put the brakes on it, and he's been whittling away at reducing the middle class as much as he could, because, of course, he wanted more power to go to the top 1% economically with tax cuts, and then we stopped investing in government, in public education.
A bunch of things. He fired the air traffic union controller, so he cracked the back of the union, and then a number of AIDS. He let AIDS kind of go out of control too. So, but that's not really economy, but just irresponsibility.
If I become governor, I will jumpstart the labor movement. I think it's great that people are in unions. I want the unions to be democratic. I don't want them to be corrupt, of course. And the elections for their leadership needs to be transparent, which I would do by law. And then I'm also for cooperatives, where workers own the business.
Yeah. That's actual socialism. We could control the factory, so just let us own and work and control the business. Co-ops.
Right.
Perfect.
So the way, two components of economic democracy, which is a general concept, but to make it work, you have to jumpstart the labor movement in both the public sector and the private sector, and then you also have to jumpstart cooperatives, because a lot of workers, they're more motivated if they have an equity interest in the business. So, and by the way, that's not necessarily socialism as you were framing it, but people working hard and owning the business and sharing the profits. I want to encourage that. And there's a lot of industry and a lot of activity, and it can start a small business and it can grow to a bigger business. But I'm comfortable with workers owning the business and sharing the profits, and working hard to make the business work.
The Trotsky, David Moore, he has a very strict line between the capitalists and the workers. He says we have more in common with the workers in Argentina and Bangladesh and all across the world than we do with Mark Zuckerberg. So that was kind of his dig at the California Nationalist Party.
Well, most Americans and most Californians, they want to hear about comparisons inside the U.S. because their comfort level goes up. And, of course, a strong labor movement and a strong cooperative movement, when there's a whole bunch of examples of these, I think, and you can point to them inside of America, and people's comfort level goes up, and then we're just moving a little bit towards economic democracy by doing those two things. And I also think it creates more commerce, more business, more employment, and I'm all for that.
I got a personal question for you, Joel. Is it okay if I call you Joel, or do I need to call you Mr. Ventresca?
You can call me Joel, Joel.
Joel, all right, Joel. You seem like you're an older man. You seem like you're doing okay economically. You don't really need this job. You're kind of taking a chance. I'm wondering who hurt you. Like why fight the good fight? Why take the mantle and have the working class? Like, is it just something you were educated with? Something that you got to do? Did somebody hurt you? Like why? Just why do you? Why are you you? Why are you, Joel?
I'm 69.
Yeah.
I work for the City and County of San Francisco for 34 years, at the International Airport here in San Francisco for 31, and then I worked for 3 years at an aging commission. And I had various roles that I played, but it allowed me to develop a skill set where I can do problem solving, and I know how to manage people and resources without waste and corruption and inefficiency. I know how to do that. And so I had the skill set, and I retired in 2018, and I was in a union for 31 years at the airport, so I have a very good retirement, and I'm very stable financially, but I am a progressive Democrat, and I like to describe myself as a progressive, anti-establishment, outsider Democrat who's competent and incorruptible.
So it's not so much that you were hurt, but you just like the outcomes. You just like seeing that working class families are satisfied and they're doing well and they're doing better.
Well, I came out of a working class background, which I described a little earlier,
right.
And I understand that a lot of people are hurting, and the dynamics inside the Democratic Party is really between progressive Democrats tied to Bernie Sanders and corporate Democrats, which are tied to the big corporation. And Newsom is a corporate Democrat. I'm a progressive Democrat, and I don't know if Newsom's going to be recalled on Tuesday. He has really hurt a lot of people across the board. For example, it's very clear that women and people of color have lost ground the 3 years that Newsom's been governor. He's hurt them tremendously by his mismanagement, and of course he just doesn't give a damn.
What about the poverty rate? Has he taken a bite out of poverty? Has it gone up or down, or is it about the same?
Well, it's going up. It's probably a main factor is the pandemic, and at one point he closed down the economy, and it was not justified by the science, and 45% of the jobs in the state of California were destroyed in a matter of hours. And he did it by executive order because he's clueless. And by the way, just to give you an example, if a person was running a bookstore and people washed their hands and the workers and the customers wore a mask, there would be no need to close that bookstore.
Right.
So a lot of the retail businesses, there was, where you're selling clothing or you're selling a product, a lot of those businesses did not need to close, but of course he didn't know what he was doing. And then I understand there's risk at bars and restaurants, and what you do is you try to let those businesses operate outside. You try to encourage takeout orders. There might need to be government assistance to help them pay overhead to stay afloat, for part of the pandemic.
I think I liked California's extra precautions coming from a red state. I feel like where it just seems like it's just all irresponsibility. It's just all like, you're not against the mask because you're principally against government orders. You just don't like doing what other people think is smart and right and good for you. So I like that California kind of went above and beyond, and ultimately, right, you shut the economy down. I think it's just, I don't know, I guess I don't really care as much. I feel like...
Well, let me give you some more examples of how he mismanaged.
He should have done more of balance, it sounds like. He should have had the businesses stay open, but the mask and stuff needed to be done too. So
right. I think based on my study of economics and the economic indicators and the science, which and I did do risk management as an expert at the airport, where we had to plan for fires, earthquakes, terrorist attacks, and pandemic. We did all this planning. I have extensive training in that, so I know what I'm talking about. And I know you have to do risk, benefit, and consequences analysis on an ongoing basis. Make sure you have accurate information, and then you figure out how to do less harm. Okay,
right, that's the process. Very good. That's good, man.
Okay, so but let me give you an example. So we had 100,000 people in our state prison system,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Half the prisoners, 50,000, got COVID.
Wow.
That's completely irresponsible.
And stupid, and people think it's just them, but you don't think they're going to cough on a jailer, and then they're going to cough on a cop, and then they're going to cough on a rich person, They act like just leaving some people, like universal health care, like we only got like 5% of the people that aren't covered. We got a lot of Medicare and Medicaid and all this stuff, but just 5%. We can't just get to the end of the bridge. We can't just get to 5 yards away from the finish line or touchdown, and we can't get there.
Well, my enact high quality health care and education, cradle to grave for all residents, that will be universal. And I'm not differentiating between documented or undocumented because I can't get in. I can't get into that. Immigration is really a federal policy, and so the government of California. By the way, we also have a state law that we're a sanctuary state, so we can't cooperate with federal immigration enforcement efforts in the state. They got to do it on their own. So and of course, if I'm governor, I got to follow that law because I have to uphold all the laws.
Well, I think it's just kind of like all things. There's pros and cons to both of it, right? You don't want people like criminals pouring over the border, but then you don't want to be just totally without a heartbeat, and you got families and breaking them up, and then they have COVID, and then you're not letting them have health care and this and that. Driver's licenses, driver's license seems like that's too much to me. I mean, it's one thing to say, okay, you're sick, go to the hospital so you don't spread your sickness everywhere. But letting foreigners that's not supposed to be in your country drive around everywhere, you know who they are, I don't know. It seems weird to me. I'll just put it that way.
Well, we permitted that years ago, just so you know.
I like the compassion part of it. I could see how conservatives would have a problem with it.
Well, I understand that, but basically the bigger issue is if you're operating a vehicle, you have to have a license, permission to do it, and then you have to have insurance in case you hurt somebody.
Right.
And they both go together. So whether you're documented or undocumented, you need a license, you need insurance. In case you hurt somebody, you have to make them whole. You don't get a pass on that. And by the way, I can't tell you how many times I've been hit by someone who has no license and no insurance. It infuriates me. And
did they stay or did they run off?
Well, often they run off.
Right. No, that's what the fear would be because I mean they're.
Or you get the information and then you give it to your insurance company. It's all bogus.
Well, yeah, exactly. So, I mean, that's by making them get insurance. You think giving them license, they'll get insurance, but they don't. They don't do any of it, and then now they're more, they're more kind of vulnerable. They're more vulnerable because they're breaking all sorts of laws now.
Well, if a person is, they don't have a license, they don't have insurance, they can't be operating a vehicle, and there has to be consequences for that. I don't care what the excuse is.
Good for you. Good. Good.
You don't have a right to endanger.
Maybe I should ask you from the right, because where are you at on crime? Right. That's the thing with New York progressives. The New York City progressives. They couldn't come out against crime, and it's like you don't want to be like the person that's just only about crime, but that's clearly an evil, right? You don't want crime. Like, that's clearly a bad thing, right?
Well, as I told you, I want to end mass incarceration and hopefully cut it to the end.
Oh, yeah. There was something I was wanting to mention. Did you Norway, you've seen the prison systems in Norway? I'm sorry, I cut you off, but I've enjoyed this conversation, but go ahead.
Okay, well, we'll get back to Norway in a minute, but we have 100,000 in state prison. I want to end mass incarceration. I think we'd shoot for 50,000 in prison. That
don't sound like a bunch. You got 40 million people in your state, so 100,000, that don't sound like hard. You should be able to whittle that down to 10,000.
Well, I don't know if that's possible, but we can start with 100,000 to 50,000, then we'll assess where we are. Okay.
Well, Norway. I can't wait to get to Norway. Come on, hurry up.
but there are three groups of people that still need to be sent to state prison, and I will make sure that it happens because it has to be a deterrent to protect the rest of society. One is people who do violence to girls and women. They will have due process rights. They'll be in trial. Once they're convicted, they will be sent to state prison. Because the violence against girls and women is way out of control based on all the studies I've read. So that's step one. Step two, of course, are the traditional violent offenders. You know, the armed robbery, the murderer, the rapist, hiring for murder. So all the violent offenders are there too. Because we can't have murderers and rapists running around the state. It's hard to do business with that.
Right. No. Get rid of them. Get rid of them.
And then the third group is, and you may not have heard this from a person running for office, but I'll tell you, I'm going to do it if I get there. I will change law, regulation, and policies to make sure that Wall Street criminals who are tied to environmental crimes that are polluting the air, water, and land and hurting people, I'm going to send them to prison. And then the too big to fail banks that have a business model built on fraud, where they're ripping off the middle class and hurting people, and some people, when they lose their home, they end up committing suicide, or their family ends in divorce, or
fraud. You had me at fraud. Milton Friedman says you can make profits, you just can't be deceptive and you can't be fraudulent.
Okay, so violence against girls and women, violent offenders, and Wall Street criminals, I will continue to send them to state prison as a deterrent to say, this is not what you can be doing in society, and if you do it, you're going to have to spend some time in a state prison cell.
Good. So you're opposed to crime. Immigration, no wall, and then open borders.
Well, I believe that the federal government should enforce the immigration laws on the 4 states on the southern border as well as the northern border with Canada. The federal government needs to enforce the immigration laws from the south and from the north, and they need to figure out how to do it. And because what's going on now is just unacceptable, and at a minimum, when people are coming in on the southern border, they need to be tested for COVID, and if they have it, they need to be quarantined for a couple weeks until they're healthy, and then, you might come up with a justification to release them. I got it because there's a big number of people. But don't release undocumented immigrants into the U.S. if they have COVID, because you're just asking for spreading the pandemic.
Right.
And I'm all for a humane solution, and I'm often asked about...
Yeah, no, that's without a doubt. I think that's clear as day. I think that's clear as day. Your compassion, your compassionate side, your progressive side shines through, so maybe saying more...
Now, the other thing is, and they asked me, what is the criteria for a path to citizenship? And for me, it's if a person is an undocumented immigrant in the U.S., if they are not engaged in crime, serious crime,
Mm-hmm.
and they're and I'm not talking about. I know they're violating the immigration laws, so.